They laughed when he walked onto the flight line in coveralls, pushing a mop instead of a toolbox. To them, he was just the old janitor, quiet, slow, invisible. But when the Army's Apache gunship broke down hours before a critical demonstration, every mechanic on base said it couldn't be fixed in time. The brass panicked. The pilots waited. And then the janitor stepped forward, wiped his hands on a rag, and asked for the keys. 2 hours later, the rotors spun to life, the bird screaming like it was brand new. That's when everyone realized who he really was, and what the Army had almost thrown away. Before we go on, hit subscribe, so stories like this reach you first. The sun had barely cracked the horizon over Fort Hollins when the hangar lights flicked on, long rows of humming fluorescents revealing the silent forms of aircraft waiting for their morning inspections. The Apache AH-64 sat in the center bay, its matte black hull catching the first slivers of daylight. It was Demo Day, a high-stakes showcase for visiting brass and contractors, millions in funding, promotions, reputations, all on the line. Every pilot, mechanic, and engineer had been prepping for weeks. Except that morning, everything went wrong. "Hydraulic feed's dead again," one of the techs shouted from under the open chassis. "Pressure's dropping faster than we can seal it." The crew chief cursed, throwing his gloves down. "We've got 2 hours before the demo flight. We're not fixing that in time." The hangar fell silent. From across the bay, a slow, steady sound echoed. Swish. Thunk! Swish! Thunk. It was the janitor. Eli Brooks, 63 years old, quiet, moved like he'd been built from sandpaper and stubbornness. He'd been on base for 7 years, always early, always alone. Nobody knew much about him except that he'd once worked somewhere out west. He didn't talk about it, and no one cared to ask. Today, as chaos swirled around the grounded Apache, he was just mopping near the supply crates. "Hey, old man!" One of the younger techs laughed. "You might want to stay clear unless you can fix hydraulics with a mop." Laughter rippled through the crew. Eli didn't answer. He just paused, eyes fixed on the chopper. "You heard me, Brooks," the kid said again, grinning. "Go clean the restroom or something." Eli leaned on his mop, staring at the Apache for a long second. Then, almost under his breath, he said, "She's leaking from the right auxiliary line. You're bleeding pressure from a faulty return coupling, not the main valve." The hangar went quiet. "What did you just say?" the crew chief asked, stepping forward. Eli looked up, calm. "You're chasing the wrong fix. That valve was replaced last week, but the coupling feeding the line, it's a half-inch off spec. Whoever installed it forced the thread." The chief frowned. "How the hell would you know that?" Eli shrugged. "Because I've seen it before." The chief turned to his crew. "Check it." 2 minutes later, a mechanic shouted from under the airframe. "He's right! The coupling's stripped!" Heads turned. The laughter was gone. The chief walked back toward Eli slowly. "How do you—" But Eli was already walking away, pushing his mop bucket toward the far end of the hangar. The crew was in full panic mode. The stripped coupling had caused a chain reaction. Seals failed. Pressure tanks ruptured. The Apache wasn't just grounded, it was dead. The test pilot, Captain Reeves, slammed his helmet down. "We've got generals coming at 0900. If we can't spin that rotor, this whole demo's toast." The chief rubbed his temples. "We've tried every spare part we have. Nothing fits. We'd need a machine shop." And then a voice came from the shadows. "You got one." They turned. Eli stood at the back of the hangar, holding a dented toolbox. It wasn't regulation issue. Older, scarred, the kind of box you'd see in a Cold War museum. "What are you doing with that?" Reeves snapped. Eli didn't flinch. "Fixing your bird." The crew stared. "Listen, old man," Reeves said, exasperated. "This is a $35 million aircraft. You're a janitor with a mop bucket, not a tech." Eli walked past him without a word. "You can stand here talking, or you can give me 20 minutes. Reeves blinked. 20 minutes to do what? Eli popped open the toolbox. Inside was a set of precision tools, so clean and old they looked handmade, some engraved with tiny symbols and serials no one recognized. "To give you your pressure back," Eli said simply. The chief hesitated. "You got clearance for this, Brooks?" Eli looked him dead in the eye. "Do you?" That was enough. The chief stepped back. "All right. People clear the line. Let him work. The janitor set down his mop and slid beneath the Apache like he'd done it 1,000 times. The crew watched in stunned silence as he worked, every move deliberate, practiced, surgical. He wasn't fumbling. He wasn't guessing. He was remembering. He pulled the stripped coupling free with a twist that looked impossible, then used a tool none of them had seen before to rethread the line manually. "How the hell is he doing that?" one of the techs whispered. Another shook his head. "That's aerospace-grade threading. You'd need a lathe for that." Eli kept going, silent, fast. Sweat rolled down his temples, but his hands didn't shake. He reassembled the hydraulic line, checked the seals, and motioned for pressure. The chief hesitated, then nodded to a tech. "Bring the line up." The gauges rose. 100 psi, 200, 300, no drop. No leak. The Apache held. The chief's eyes went wide. "Holy hell!" Eli slid out from under the fuselage, wiping his hands. "She'll hold for the demo, but you're going to want to swap that feed before you take her over salt air." The crew just stared. "Who are you?" the chief finally asked. Eli's eyes flicked toward the helicopter. "Just someone who's cleaned up worse messes." He grabbed his mop, turned, and started walking out. But before he reached the door, a shout echoed through the hangar. "Wait!" Captain Reeves jogged after him. "We've got a dozen birds on base, maintenance backlogs for weeks. If you can fix one Apache like that..." Eli stopped. "Not interested." Reeves blinked. "What do you mean, not interested?" "We could..." Eli turned, voice quiet but firm. "I'm not your miracle worker. I just don't like watching people treat a machine like it's disposable." And then he was gone. The demo crowd gathered. Officers, generals, journalists, contractors. The Apache roared to life, every system green, rotor spinning smooth. When the pilot took off, the wind from the blades whipped across the hangar lot, scattering papers, lifting hats. The sound was perfect. No sputter, no whine, just clean power. The brass clapped. The engineers smiled. Nobody mentioned the janitor. But up in the catwalk, unseen, Eli watched the bird climb. His reflection shimmered against the glass of the observation bay, older, tired, but proud. And for a brief moment, the roar of the rotors wasn't just noise. It was memory. A desert years ago, smoke rising from a downed Apache, his crew gone. Him crawling through sand to salvage what was left. He'd sworn never to touch another one again, until today. He smiled faintly, whispered to himself, "Still flies." That was when the hangar intercom crackled. "Attention maintenance. Secondary fuel pump failure on Apache 2. Repeat, second bird grounded." The chief froze. "Not again." Reeves turned pale. "We can't delay another demo." Before he could say anything else, someone pointed toward the exit. Eli was already there, rolling his mop bucket back inside. "Same issue?" he asked calmly. The chief swallowed. "Fuel system this time. We've got 80 minutes before the second demo." Eli nodded. "You got a spare flow sensor?" "Yeah, but it's fried. Needs calibration." Eli set down the mop handle, grabbed his wrench, and said, "Then we make it fit." For the next hour, the hangar became a symphony of motion. Eli working faster than men half his age. He rerouted lines, adjusted flow regulators, recalibrated pressure sensors by ear, matching the hum of the pump to an internal rhythm only he could hear. It wasn't repair. It was resurrection. When he stepped back, wiped his hands, and gave the thumbs up, the entire crew held their breath. Reeves turned the key. The engine sputtered once, then came alive. The second Apache screamed back to life, blades cutting through the air in a flawless whir. The timer on the wall read 1 hour, 57 minutes, exactly 2 hours. The same people who'd laughed at him that morning were now staring like they'd seen a ghost. Eli didn't wait for applause. He just picked up his bucket, mop sloshing softly, and walked out under the rising sun. As he reached the door, the chief called out, voice shaking, "Brooks! Who were you before this job?" Eli paused in the doorway. He looked back over his shoulder, eyes hidden by the shadow. "Somebody who used to fly what you just broke." And then he was gone. The next morning, Fort Hollins buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. Word had spread. Every corner of the base, Cafeteria, barracks, control tower, people whispered the same thing. The janitor fixed an Apache. 2 of them. In under 2 hours. Nobody believed it at first. Then the footage hit internal servers, security cams showing a gray-haired man sliding under a multi-million-dollar aircraft, moving with the calm precision of someone who'd built it. By sunrise, Command wanted answers. The base commander, Colonel Hastings, stood behind a steel desk, eyes locked on the still frame frozen on the monitor. Eli Brooks, crouched beside the Apache, hand on the hydraulic line. "Who authorized this?" He barked. No one spoke. The crew chief looked pale. "Sir, technically no one. The system was failing and—" "You let a janitor near classified equipment?" "Sir, he knew things we didn't." "Damn right he did," Hastings snapped. "You realize that model's still under restricted maintenance? We have contractors waiting for clearance, and you let a civilian mop jockey start rewiring fuel systems like he's on Lockheed's payroll?" The chief opened his mouth, then closed it again. Hastings slammed his hand on the desk. "I want that man in my office in 10 minutes. The door opened quietly. Eli walked in. Same old coveralls, same calm gait. He stopped just inside the threshold. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Hastings folded his arms. "Mr. Brooks, do you have any idea what kind of mess you've made for this base?" Eli tilted his head slightly. "I fixed 2 aircraft. That's the opposite of a mess." The colonel's jaw tightened. "You bypassed security protocol, engaged restricted equipment without clearance, and prevented your showcase from collapsing in front of Pentagon brass." Eli cut in, voice even. The room went still. Hastings' eyes narrowed. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Eli looked down for a moment, then up again. "Nobody, sir. Not anymore." The colonel turned to his aide. "Pull his file." The aide hesitated. "Sir, you're gonna want to see this." He slid a classified folder across the desk. Hastings flipped it open and froze. Inside were commendations, flight logs, and an official discharge record stamped Top Secret. At the top, Lieutenant Cole Elijah Brooks, U.S. Army Aviation Experimental Weapons Division. The colonel looked up slowly. "You're Lieutenant Elijah Brooks?" Eli nodded once. "Was." Hastings blinked. "You worked on Project Cerberus." Eli's gaze didn't waver. "I built the prototype." The colonel leaned back, stunned. "You designed the Apache Flight Diagnostic Core?" Eli gave a faint smile. "We called it the Heartbeat. Without it, she's just a machine." The colonel set the file down, voice quiet now. "Why the hell are you mopping hangar floors?" Eli looked away. "Because 20 years ago, one of my birds went down. My co-pilot didn't make it. I told command the systems weren't ready. They launched anyway. After that, the Army decided I was a liability. I signed a non-disclosure and walked away." The room was silent. He continued. "A few years later, they contracted the same design out to private firms. Apache evolved, but the core stayed the same. When I heard they were deploying my Heartbeat again, I took a custodial job at Hollins. Figured I could at least make sure they were treating her right." Hastings exhaled slowly. "So all this time, you've been working here unseen, cleaning floors under a false title?" Eli gave a tired smile. "Not false, just less complicated." The colonel paced the room, then stopped. "You understand? What you did yesterday? It's going to reach the Pentagon. They're going to want to debrief you." Eli shrugged. "They can try." "Try?" "I'm not coming back," he said simply. "That part of my life's over." Hastings frowned. "You could help us? We're losing good mechanics to budget cuts. Half our systems are outdated." "I didn't stay to fix your budget, Colonel." Eli's tone hardened just a fraction. "I stayed to make sure nobody died the way my co-pilot did. That's it." Hastings studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You know, Brooks, They laughed at you. Eli smiled faintly. They laugh at a lot of people who keep things running. The colonel's expression softened. You rebuilt an Apache from scratch in 2 hours. That's not luck. That's legacy. Eli's gaze drifted to the window where the 2 Apaches gleamed on the tarmac. Legacy doesn't mean much if no one learns from it. 2 days later, a storm rolled across the desert. The base was quiet. No demos, no press, just wind and thunder. But inside Hangar 4, one Apache was still warm from diagnostics. Reeves stood beside it, holding a flight helmet. Command says we're grounded until further notice. Eli smirked. Command's afraid of the rain. Reeves looked nervous. They also said you're not supposed to touch the aircraft anymore. Good thing I'm not touching it. Reeves raised an eyebrow. You're not thinking, I need to know she still flies. Before Reeves could stop him, Eli climbed into the cockpit with the familiarity of someone returning home. His hands moved instinctively. Switches, toggles, controls. The systems hummed back to life. He pressed the ignition. The rotors began to spin, slow at first, then faster. The tower radio crackled. Hangar 4, abort startup immediately. Unauthorized activation. Eli keyed the mic. Hangar 4 copies, just giving her a heartbeat check. Who is this? There was a pause, then his voice came steady. Lil T. Cole Elijah Brooks, U.S. Army Experimental Division. Authorization code. Expired. The rotors roared. The hangar doors rolled open, the storm outside tearing at the sand. Reeves shouted over the noise, You can't take her up in this. Eli smiled. I'm not taking her up, just giving her air. The Apache lifted barely 3 feet off the ground, hovering steady, lightning flashing in the distance. The sound filled the hangar, a perfect rhythm. For a brief moment, Eli closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw his old co-pilot smiling in the next seat, the desert stretching endless beneath them. He whispered, barely audible, You'd have liked this one, Tom. Then he brought her down, smooth, flawless. As the rotors slowed, Reeves just stared. That was beautiful. Eli chuckled softly. No, that was right. A week later, a memo circulated through command channels. Reinstatement offer, Lieutenant Cole Sierretti, Elijah Brooks, Consultant, Advanced Aviation Division. He never signed it. Instead, he left a single-page note in the hangar logbook. Everything breaks. What matters is knowing how to make it live again. E.B. When the next morning shift arrived, his locker was empty, just his mop standing upright beside the Apache. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hangar, Reeves found something tucked into the pilot seat. A dog tag, old and tarnished. On the back, one line engraved deep enough to last forever. Still flies. The Apache's rotors slowed to a whisper as the sun dipped low, turning the tarmac gold. The brass stood silent, the pilot speechless, watching the bird they'd written off purr like it had just rolled out of the factory. No one clapped. No one dared. The man who'd just done the impossible didn't ask for it anyway. He simply stepped down from the cockpit, hands streaked with oil, eyes calm as stone. Colonel Reeves broke the silence first. How did you... The janitor, whose name tag just read W. Rains, cut him off with a small shrug. Used to work on these, he said quietly. Long time ago. The colonel frowned. Work on them? As in... Rains handed him a data tablet, the system log still open. Every diagnostic check, every circuit test passed, no errors. Then, before walking off, he added, As in, I helped design the flight control interface. Back before I retired. It hit them all at once. The janitor they'd been mocking for months was Chief Warrant Officer Walter Rains, one of the original test engineers from Hughes Aircraft, the man whose schematics still hung in Apache maintenance manuals. No one knew he'd re-enlisted quietly after his son's death overseas. He didn't want a title or rank or respect. He just wanted to stay near the machines he'd built and the soldiers who flew them. That night, when the crews filed out, Rains stayed behind. He mopped the same hangar floor, humming softly as he worked, the echo of rotor blades still in the air. The pilots who passed him didn't laugh this time. They stopped, saluted, and kept walking. A young mechanic approached, nervous. "Sir." Chief, why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" Rains smiled faintly. "Didn't need to. Some things you prove with work, not words." He turned back to his mop, and for a long moment, the hangar lights reflected off the polished floor, bright as new steel. Outside, the Apache sat gleaming under floodlights, a silent testament to the man everyone thought was nobody. And from that day on, no one on that base ever called him just the janitor again. The barracks was quiet, too quiet for a training day that was supposed to end at 1700, but the silence carried a heavy weight, the kind only those who've served would recognize. In the corner of the room, she lay on the floor, head throbbing, boots still echoing against the walls. The other soldiers had stopped, staring, unsure if they should intervene. "What the hell happened here?" muttered one. No one answered. Her uniform was torn, helmet dented, and the bruise forming across her temple was only the first of many. They had kicked her in the head. Not a mistake, not an accident, a warning. And yet even in the chaos, she did not cry. She did not break. Because the truth about her would soon stop every soldier, every officer, and ultimately 3 generals themselves in their tracks. Before we go on, hit subscribe, so stories like this reach you first. The morning had started like any other at Fort Valor Training Facility. Drills, obstacle courses, and a relentless march under the hot sun. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Hayes was one of the few women in the battalion, and she had earned every ounce of respect from instructors and peers alike. Until jealousy and ego took hold. She wasn't just good. She was exceptional. Her marksmanship, endurance, and tactical knowledge had outperformed almost every male candidate in her class. But in a unit steeped in rigid hierarchy and old-school pride, excellence in a woman was often seen as a threat rather than an achievement. The weeks leading up to that fateful afternoon had been a silent war. Whispers in the hallways, subtle pushes during drills, and small sabotage attempts, nothing that would draw formal complaints, but enough to wear her down mentally. By the time the morning drill ended, Rachel had already been pushed to her limits. She had scaled walls faster, completed obstacle courses in record times, and called out errors in strategy that some male peers didn't want to admit. Then came the confrontation. It was supposed to be a standard team exercise, a simulated urban raid. But one officer, resentful of her performance, decided to make a point. During the exercise, Rachel had been ordered into a narrow corridor. The officer blocked her path, sneered, and deliberately shoved her to the ground. When she resisted, 2 others joined in. Her head hit the metal edge of a barricade. The room spun. Pain exploded across her skull. She fell hard, boots scraping the floor, helmet dented, and the officer's boots pressed against her side as they laughed. But Rachel didn't panic. She gritted her teeth, gripping her weapon with one hand, and slowly rose, her eyes scanning the room. Every soldier in that unit froze. The laughter died. Some looked away, some whispered excuses. But she looked them all in the eye. "You think this breaks me?" she said, voice calm but sharp. "Because it doesn't." Her composure in the face of brute force caught the attention of higher command. A call went out, and within minutes the chain of command was informed. Within the hour, 3 generals, none of them expected to intervene in a training exercise, were on base, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. Rachel stood at attention, though her head throbbed. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply let her actions speak. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," one general said, walking toward the offending officer. "I've reviewed the report." "Explain this to me." The officer stammered, fumbling for excuses. But the generals had already seen enough. Body cam footage, eyewitness accounts, and Rachel's own unshakable composure. "This unit," one general declared, "has failed to uphold the standards of discipline and respect we expect. Effective immediately, this unit is shut down pending full investigation." Rachel's eyes didn't waver. She didn't need recognition. The justice had been served in the form of accountability. By the time the dust settled, word of what had happened spread across the base. Soldiers who had doubted her, envied her, or underestimated her now stood in silent respect, realizing the cost of true courage under fire. But this was just the beginning. Rachel knew that her path in the military would always be challenging, especially as a woman breaking barriers in a male-dominated world. Yet this day had proven one thing: honor, skill, and resilience cannot be ignored, no matter how hard others try to suppress them. After the generals left, the unit was a different place. The previous hierarchy, built on arrogance and intimidation, had collapsed. Soldiers whispered behind closed doors, unsure how to act around Rachel. Some felt guilt for watching, others felt fear, and a few still tried to cling to their fading authority. Rachel, however, did not seek revenge. She knew that leadership wasn't about proving power. It was about earning respect through action and integrity. She was assigned to oversee the next phase of training, an intense week-long urban combat simulation designed to test strategy, endurance, and teamwork. Every squad had to navigate a labyrinth of mock streets, hostage situations, and live fire exercises, all under the watchful eyes of multiple high-ranking officers, including a general. From the very start, she noticed subtle resistance. Some of her peers hesitated to follow her orders. Others openly challenged her tactics. But Rachel remained calm. Every command was precise, every move deliberate. She corrected mistakes swiftly, but never insulted anyone. Instead, she showed them the way by example. On the second day, the simulation escalated. Smoke filled the training grounds, alarms blared, and teams had to navigate unfamiliar territory with civilians, actors, in play. One of the male officers who had assaulted her during the prior incident tried to assert dominance again, barking orders over her squad. Rachel paused, assessing the situation. She identified the vulnerabilities in the simulation and countered instantly, coordinating the squads with clarity and authority. The outcome was decisive. Her team completed the mission flawlessly, while others floundered under confusion and poor communication. By the third day, whispers of her competence had spread. Even those who once doubted her began respecting her skills. A few approached privately, acknowledging their prior mistakes. Rachel accepted apologies with dignity, never dwelling on the past. Meanwhile, the investigation into the assault continued. Interviews were conducted, body cam footage reviewed, and personnel files examined. The general's intervention was firm. The offending officer and any accomplices would face formal disciplinary action, including potential dismissal from the unit. Rachel herself, however, remained focused on the task at hand. She knew that the ultimate test would come on the final day, a full-scale simulated attack where strategy, composure, and leadership would determine the winners. The night before, she reviewed her plans in private. She mapped every building, every potential ambush, every team member's strengths. She visualized each moment, each decision, mentally preparing for the chaos ahead. The next morning, the final simulation began. Explosions boomed, smoke obscured vision, and simulated gunfire echoed across the compound. Rachel's team moved with precision, executing her strategies flawlessly. Other teams faltered, exposing their lack of coordination and leadership. In the chaos, the officer who had previously assaulted her made a critical mistake, misdirecting his squad into a dead end. Rachel's team intercepted, completing their objectives while maintaining minimal casualties. By the end of the exercise, it was undeniable. Rachel was the leader they had been ignoring. The officer who had been attacked was disgraced, and the entire unit had witnessed what true courage and competence looked like. The generals, who had returned to observe the simulation, were visibly impressed. One of them approached Rachel personally. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," he said, "your performance today didn't just prove your skills. It reminded everyone here what it means to lead with honor and integrity." "Well done," Rachel nodded, maintaining her composure. She knew this victory wasn't about personal glory. It was about changing the culture of the unit, proving that discipline, respect, and skill were non-negotiable, regardless of gender or rank. By the end of the week, the unit had transformed. Soldiers who once mocked her now followed her instructions without hesitation. Respect had been earned, trust had been rebuilt, and the legacy of the assault had been replaced by a story of resilience, justice, and leadership. Even the officer responsible faced formal charges. The generals made it clear. There would be zero tolerance for misconduct, and Rachel's actions had ensured accountability. The final exercise had escalated far beyond the expectations of any officer. What was meant to be a controlled simulation had become a full-scale urban combat scenario designed to test every ounce of skill, endurance, and leadership. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Hayes stood at the edge of the mock city, surveying the chaos. Smoke curled through the streets, alarms blared, and the sounds of simulated gunfire rang out in every direction. Her team moved like a well-oiled machine, following her orders to the letter. Every decision she made was precise, every movement deliberate. Then the unexpected happened. A live comms alert blared in her headset. "Rachel, multiple breaches reported in Sector C. This is not a simulation. Unknown intruders inside the training compound." Her heart raced, but her mind stayed sharp. She quickly assessed the threat. A group of armed personnel, possibly a rogue element exploiting the simulation as cover. "Team, eyes sharp. Move to intercept. Hold your positions until I give the order," she instructed, voice steady despite the pounding adrenaline. Rachel led her squad through smoke-filled corridors, checking every corner and securing every building. The intruders were skilled, but they weren't prepared for her team's cohesion and her tactical precision. As they rounded a corner, one of the rogue operatives lunged at her. Reflexes honed from years of training kicked in. She sidestepped, disarmed him, and neutralized the threat in a single fluid motion. Through the chaos, Rachel's leadership became clear. She coordinated her team to cover all flanks, prioritize threats, and extract any simulated civilians safely. Every move demonstrated not just skill, but authority and decisiveness. The officer who had assaulted her weeks earlier appeared, trying to assert control over his squad. Rachel didn't flinch. She moved toward him, calm and unyielding. "You're out of your depth," she said, voice carrying through the corridor. "This isn't a drill," he spat back. Rachel's team flanked him, cutting off all escape routes. Within moments, he was restrained, his attempts at dominance nullified. Meanwhile, the rest of the rogue elements were systematically neutralized, with Rachel's team executing every maneuver flawlessly. By the time the generals arrived to observe the aftermath, the compound was secure, threats contained, and casualties minimal. The generals approached Rachel personally. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," one said, voice solemn, "your leadership today didn't just protect lives. You restored order, discipline, and respect to this unit. Exceptional work." Rachel nodded, quietly acknowledging the praise. Her goal had never been recognition. It had been justice and integrity. The officer responsible for the initial assault was escorted away under formal investigation. His authority completely dismantled, he would face severe consequences for his actions. The simulation, now very real in its implications, had proven one thing. Rachel was not only a skilled soldier but a true leader. Her courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right had transformed the unit and ensured that respect and discipline would be upheld. By the end of the day, whispers of her actions had spread across the base. Soldiers who once doubted her now followed her lead. Their respect earned not through intimidation but through example. Rachel finally allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Standing atop a small ridge overlooking the compound, she could see the smoke curling in the morning light. The unit had been tested, broken, and rebuilt, and she had been the catalyst. She knew challenges would continue to come. But one truth had been proven beyond doubt. Honor, skill, and resilience could never be ignored. The days following the simulation were quieter, but the effects of Rachel Hayes' leadership were already reverberating throughout the base. The officers who had doubted her, the peers who had mocked her, and the unit that had assaulted her were now confronted with a simple truth. She was unbreakable, skilled, and above all, just. The investigation concluded swiftly. The officer responsible for the assault was removed from the unit, stripped of command privileges, and faced formal disciplinary action. 2 others who had participated in the attack received severe reprimands. The general's firm decision sent a clear message. Misconduct would no longer be tolerated. Rachel, however, did not dwell on personal vindication. Her focus was on the unit, reshaping its culture to prioritize skill, integrity, and mutual respect. She led debriefings, personally mentoring soldiers who had previously been resistant to her authority. She emphasized teamwork over ego, discipline over intimidation, and resilience over retaliation. Slowly, the transformation became tangible. Squads that had been fractured by jealousy and hierarchy now operated as cohesive units. Exercises ran smoother, communications improved, and trust once eroded was restored. Soldiers began to emulate Rachel's example, learning that leadership meant accountability and courage, not brute force. Her impact went beyond tactical proficiency. Soldiers reported a renewed sense of purpose and morale. Women in the unit, previously hesitant to assert themselves, began participating more actively in operations. Rachel's presence became a symbol, proof that excellence and determination could not be ignored, regardless of gender. One morning, months later, the generals returned to the base for a routine inspection. They observed Rachel conducting a complex joint drill. Her team moved with precision, executing maneuvers she had meticulously planned. The generals exchanged glances, nodding in approval. "She's changed this unit," one said quietly. "Completely," replied another. After the exercise, the generals personally commended Rachel, acknowledging her not only for tactical brilliance, but for reshaping the culture of the unit. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," one said, "you've set a new standard for leadership. Your courage under fire, your commitment to justice, and your ability to inspire those around you are remarkable. You've earned the respect of every soldier here, and you've ensured that misconduct will never again go unchecked." Rachel accepted the commendation humbly, knowing that the true reward was the restored honor of her unit and the lives she had positively impacted. Even the soldiers who had once doubted her now approached with respect, asking for guidance and acknowledging their previous mistakes. One of them, a young recruit who had witnessed the assault firsthand, approached her privately. "Ma'am, I owe you my respect. I didn't see it then, but now I do. Thank you for showing us how a true leader acts." Rachel nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Remember this. Leadership isn't about who's the strongest or who can intimidate. It's about responsibility, integrity, and doing the right thing even when it's hard." By the end of the year, Rachel's story had spread beyond the base. Her actions became an example in training manuals, leadership seminars, and veteran networks. She was invited to speak at conferences, sharing her experiences to teach future officers about courage, accountability, and the power of standing up for what's right. The unit itself was no longer defined by arrogance or misconduct, but by discipline, skill, and mutual respect. Soldiers who had once underestimated her now followed her lead with pride. New recruits were inspired by her story, knowing that honor, perseverance, and integrity would always prevail. And Rachel? She continued to lead quietly, letting her actions speak louder than words. She knew that true respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned. And through her unwavering courage, she had not only earned it, but had redefined what it meant to be a leader in the modern military. They tried to break her, humiliate her, and erase her presence. But some fires don't destroy, they forge. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Hayes didn't just survive the assault. She reshaped an entire unit, reminded the military what true courage looks like, and proved that honor will always prevail. This isn't just a story of one soldier's resilience. It's a lesson for every leader who thinks power comes from fear. True strength comes from integrity, action, and the courage to stand tall when the world tries to knock you down. Before we go on, hit subscribe, so stories like this reach you first.